Hey guys, Toolman Tim here. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. It's March 29th, 2022, and this is episode 89 of the Workshop Podcast. And tonight I've got an extra special guest coming on, actually extra special guests. It's going to be rather exciting. I've got Phil Rabalais and his wife, Gillian, and I pronounced that right. I did good. Awesome. So yeah, they're going to come on in just a minute and they're going to tell their story of their, I don't know if I'd call it interesting, but anyway, they had an incredible experience last year with Hurricane Ida, and they're going to talk about prepper lessons they learned and how being prepared helped, and we'll get into all that. We love to hear people's stories on here. But before that, real quick, we'll just give you a couple of announcements. First off, the big one is Telegram. We've been building that Telegram group like crazy, and it's going great. So if you want to become part of the workshop community, grab the link in the description below. Come by and join us. Take a minute, leave a review on iTunes or wherever it happens to be, just to let people know that you appreciate the content, because that's what we do it for. And I've told you guys this a few times now, but we are booked out until the 1st of June for guests, which is great. But if you have any suggestions or potential guests you want me to reach out to, now's the time to send them my way, and we will start reaching out to some people. And the worst thing they can do is say no. So send them my way and let me know. So with that, guys, it's been a busy evening. Let's get Phil and Gillian on here. Hey guys, how are you?
Hi.
How you doing,
Good.
man?
Good. So for, probably actually, honestly, it's kind of cool. I love having, so my podcast kind of grew out of kind of the extension of the survival podcast communities. There's a lot there. So now that I've been, you guys got me roped in with the Prepper Broadcast Network. I've met, I feel like I've known you guys forever, and I haven't, but it's been great so far. So tell, if you want to introduce yourselves, guys, and you can, talk about the Matter of Facts podcast, where you're from, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, my name's Phil. This is my wife, Gillian. I started the Matter of Facts podcast back in August 2016, actually. And, I've always kind of felt like there were certain things that none of us ever really call prepping or survival or anything. It's just things that we naturally understood you're supposed to do living down here on the Gulf Coast. Being ready for hurricanes and floods and tornadoes and locusts and mosquitoes the size of chickens that run around at war parties. There's a variety of problems we deal with down here, and people deal with problems everywhere, but there's things we do to get ready for them that none of us ever called prepping. And then I hit a point in my life right in 2016. I was working from home for a couple of days because we were dealing with some pretty severe flooding all across South Louisiana. Flooding in South Louisiana is not exactly a new thing, but some of the areas that were flooding were noteworthy because they hadn't flooded in my lifetime. We had sections of the interstate that the water, rivers jumped their banks and cut off parts of the interstate. And interstates are built on high ground, so that was very noteworthy and frightening. And what really got me was I was watching on the news, and there was a group of motorists that were stuck on the interstate because the river jumped its banks and swept across the interstate. Everybody came to a stop. And then about a mile and a half west of that, the river jumped its banks again and cut the interstate off behind those motorists. So you had a group of motorists who had running water from a raging river and floods in front of and behind them. They couldn't move. They were cut off. It would have been a suicide mission to try to drive through it, and you'd have been half crazy to try to get out of your vehicle and walk through it. So they were stuck out there, and they were stuck out there for hours, to the point where state police had to actually come in and airdrop them pallets of water, because they were sitting out there for, I think, 4 or 5 hours in the middle of the heat, nothing to eat or drink. And the gears started turning, because I started thinking to myself, I'm like, I know that there are people who left their house that day and thought, I'll be home in 10 minutes. And then that's what they ran into. And that was what got my gears turning, and started thinking about all of this, like, I don't even want to call it survival, but all this old school preparedness knowledge that our parents knew and our grandparents knew and our great-grandparents lived through the Depression certainly knew. But people today just don't seem to have picked it up. So I started the podcast and eventually met Andrew, my co-host, and I've been bringing Gillian on the show to give me her perspective, but we've tried to kind of preach this idea that prepping is normal. It's every day. Everybody does it, whether you realize it or not. We're trying to break down the stigma and show people that there are very simple, everyday things you either already do or could be doing to help you survive a really bad day.
That's awesome. Man, I couldn't even imagine being stranded on both sides of the. And so you're a lifetime resident of the New Orleans area, or that?
Not lifetime. I actually grew up in southeast Texas for a time before my family relocated back out this direction. The general spiel is that the Rabalais family immigrated to Louisiana in like the mid 18th century.
Okay.
So there have been Rabalais here for a long time. A bunch of us just went to Texas, and then some of us came back.
So Gillian, what did you think when Phil decided, or come home and, well, I don't know. I've heard bits and pieces of this conversation in some of your past episodes, but tell me how you felt when he decided to be a crazy doomsday. No, I'm just kidding. Decided to start becoming prepared, right?
Luckily for me, he kind of broke me in gently with kind of bringing bits and pieces in. And I remember when he started the podcast, he wanted me to take his picture, and he didn't know what to call it. And I was like, "What are you doing? This is so ridiculous." And then here we are, 6 years later? Yeah, about 6 years later, and at first it was just kind of like, okay, this is Phil's new hobby. We're going to have all sorts of things going on. And then, things have happened since then in those last 6 years, and especially in the last 3 or 4 years, that really brought me into this whole lifestyle and on board with Phil and totally backing him. We have almost, I would say, weekly conversations about our preps. I wouldn't say daily, but when we go grocery shopping, which is a weekly thing for us, we look at what we have in long-term storage. We look at what we have in the overflow containers, and then we look at what we have in our everyday in the kitchen kind of thing. So we're always keeping a record of all that stuff just so that we know. But I'm totally on board now. I wouldn't say I'm like bringing in the the armor that he brings in, or I'm not going out and buying new guns and all that stuff. But I think as far as a supportive wife goes in this lifestyle, I'm there. I'm 100% in.
So the prepping and the podcast kind of came almost at the same time then, did it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say yeah. Because, kind of just like the 5 seconds of my backstory is like the gears started turning when I deployed to Iraq, forever ago, when I was a kid, when I was enlisted. Okay. And for that period of time, I looked at the world around me and I saw what I still to this day tell people was like a dry run of a post-apocalyptic society. Wow. You know what I'm saying? Like no hospitals, no schools, no police, no functioning government, no utilities. Like the whole country until the U.S., started pouring resources in to try to rebuild it. It was the third. It was built beyond the third world. It was an absolutely life-altering moment in time where I saw what a broken country really looked like. But I came home and thought that was Iraq. So in my brain, I was still, 22 years old, and I had the blinders on that most people that age have. And I thought to myself, well, that was Iraq. That could never happen here. And then Hurricane Katrina happened.
Yeah.
And I was still in the National Guard, and I was immediately put on orders, and I watched New Orleans turn into the third world. 72 hours without power, the city tried to eat itself. Mm-hmm. And that was the moment I thought to myself, I'm like, okay, so what I saw in Iraq is happening here in the U.S.
It was scary for me because I had just gotten him home from Iraq, and and then 6 months later he's deployed to New Orleans in Belle Chase area, and he I was more scared for him being in the New Orleans area during Katrina than I think I was with him being in Iraq, which is crazy. But
I didn't get mortared in Belle Chase.
You didn't get mortared in Belle Chase, but the things that you see on TV with, when people evacuate for hurricanes, especially ones like Ida and Katrina, they're leaving their homes unmanned, and so there's nobody there. And so, of course, you get break-ins, and people are breaking into storefronts, and they're doing all sorts of stuff. And so it was just mad chaos in New Orleans, and my boyfriend at the time was down there, and I didn't know when he was going to come home. They had no guns. That went underwater. He had to use his own personal sidearm. And
Oh, I
there were no
see.
beds, there was no clothes, there was no food, there was nothing. It was all gone, like it washed away. It's all in the bottom of
Wow.
Lake Pontchartrain.
Yep, we went back to MREs and water bottles and army cots like super, super quick.
Yeah. So I
What-
was glad when he came home every other weekend.
Yeah. Well, I mean, after about 4 weeks of the nonsense, like they'd cut us loose for safety stand down, which is basically a 3-day weekend, so you don't go completely nuts.
Okay.
And when that would happen, the first one of those I actually got, I came and picked you up, and me, and one of my sergeants went back to my hometown, Slidell. And the first thing I did when I got there was I went into my room, I grabbed a duffel bag, and I started stuffing it with uniforms. Because when I evacuated for Hurricane Katrina, I had already checked in with my unit and asked them, "Are we gonna get activated? Like, do you need me to go ahead, pack a bag, and come in right now?" And they said, "No, go ahead and evacuate." So I did. And then they called me. Let's see, I had that conversation with them about 4 p.m. on a Saturday. You and I were on the road until 4 a.m. trying to get
Texas.
Yeah, to Texas, to my grandparents' house. And then I got a call about 8 o'clock the next morning from my unit saying, "Oh, by the way, we need you to get to Baton Rouge." And I was like,
Yeah, and Katrina hadn't yet made landfall.
yeah. Wanted me
And
to
they
drive,
wanted him to drive
into the
back
path
in.
of the hurricane. And I didn't even have my vehicle. I'd left it in Hammond, and the two of us drove together in your car. So anyway, long version of the short story, like when I showed up to do my duty and try to, do my part to try to, work in the rescue mission, I literally showed up with like a bag of civilian clothes, and that was it. Had my military ID. They had to find me a set of mechanics coveralls, and I wore those like exclusively for 3.5 weeks.
And it's crazy because I'm up here in little old Canada, and I remember like 2 or 3 days out of Katrina before it hit, they were talking about it, and they're like, it looks like it could be, and then it was getting closer and closer, and I remember them saying, like, I don't remember a lot, but I remember like this could be bad. It wasn't like, I don't think it was completely unexpected, was it?
It wasn't completely unexpected. In some ways, Katrina was... It's funny to say it was worse than we expected, because we pretty well expected... a Cat 4 hurricane going that close to New Orleans, people were comparing it to Betsy, which Hurricane Betsy is one of the most awful storms to hit this area in recorded history. But that being said, we pretty much all expected Katrina to be awful. What happened to make it worse was when the levees breached.
Right.
When the levees broke, you now had entire sections of the city under 4 to 6 feet of water, and that was inside levee protection. So now the levees that are supposed to keep the river out are holding the river in. And that created complete turmoil in even trying to assess the damage, much less deal with the problem. Because it's like I try to explain to somebody, I'm like, you got to bear in mind that like every time someone you spit on the sidewalk in New Orleans, you have to have electric pumps pump the water in the streets back to the other side of the levee, and those electric pumps don't work really well when the area is flooded. So before you can even get the electric pumps to work to get the water out of the streets, you have to get the water out of the streets to get power restored. So it becomes this huge multifaceted problem where like we have to get power restored, but we have to do all these things in the middle of this disaster to get power restored. And if you can't get power restored, you can't operate hospitals. You have massive difficulty dealing with first responder situations. Like it's I could write a book about how screwed up New Orleans was after Katrina, and it'd take me 6 months. Just try to explain like all the different ways that this little pocket of humanity was turned upside down.
And New Orleans wasn't even hit head on. It was
Nope.
Mississippi that was hit head on.
Yep.
They got the eye of the storm, which is where the strongest winds are. And Gulfport, Biloxi area was literally leveled.
Yeah. There were sections of Gulfport, Biloxi that literally looked like an atomic bomb had gone off.
You can still, when we went to pick up Andrew, I was showing him like, look, these trees that you see broken, those are from Katrina. That's not from Ida that just came through.
Man, I never even thought about it. I might have to have you back on another time to tell stories about Katrina. That was
Yeah, we're here for Ida.
no, I don't mind. I forgot all about. I forgot you were deployed into that. That is like incredibly intriguing.
But to your point, it was a combination of Iraq and Katrina that kind of set me on that path towards becoming a prepper. And it was 2016 when the gears really started turning. And over the course of 6 years, working the podcast and digging into the subject and meeting more subject matter experts, people that know things I don't or know the subject matter that I do, it was kind of our own personal prepper journey, along with running the show.
So sliding ahead then. So from 2016 to 2021, right? That's when Ida hit.
Yeah.
You were living the prepared life, or, doing your best to kind of build up toward it. So in that time, how would you I'm sure there were different times that they said, hey, we got a hurricane coming. So what was the normal response when they told you we've got a hurricane coming? What would you do to prep? That kind of stuff.
I mean, honestly, like normal pre-hurricane preps for the average person is like run to the store, get hurricane snacks, which is non-perishable food for in case your power's out for several days and everything in your fridge spoils. Get a couple cases of bottled water. By the way, that's usually a melee at every store. Everybody fighting over bottled water.
Bottled water and bread.
Yeah, milk and bread. I've never understood why everybody rushed out to buy milk and bread before a hurricane. It's a weird thing around here. And then there's lines at every gas station in town. Everybody who suddenly realized being at a quarter tank of gas is a really bad deal when there's a hurricane coming. Right. And for us, I mean, our normal pre-hurricane prep, we'll wait till the storm's about 3-4 days out, and then we'll go gas up our cars and just do a last-minute check. Because we're already sitting on bottled water. We're already sitting on potable water. We're already sitting on food. We've already got gas for the generator. We've already got most of those things everybody else rushes out to go get. So when they're running around like chickens with their heads cut off, I'm pretty much sitting on the back porch smoking a cigar, waiting to see what's going to happen, watching the hurricane tracker.
Yeah.
How about you, Gillian? Same. I mean, I know you're.
Yeah, it's the same for us. But for me, for Ida, I can remember the day before, or the day it hit that night. So that morning, Piper and I, our daughter who's 9, we got in the car and went to the gas stations that we could find that were still open, because most of them had closed because they were out of gas. But there were a few that were going to stay open during the storm, and of course, she tells me that, this clerk tells me that, I was like, y'all are nuts. Okay. So Piper and I go and get all of the comfort food, so chips and cookies and, candy and all that stuff, thinking we're just going to sit at home. We're going to lose power. We're going to play cards and board games, and, so my thought when we're going through this kind of stuff is, how can I keep my kid entertained? And in the back of my head as a parent going, now how can I keep her safe? Where are we going to be? Do we have all of our blankets and pillows in a room? Do we have the dog's collars and leashes, and everybody has their shoes in case we have to get out of the house? So that's what I'm thinking about. But then I'm also trying to think of what is going to make this an easy process, because it's going to get scary. Right. Little did we know how scary it was going to get. Yeah. Because at that time, the track was still going a little more west of us. So we were just going to get some storm surge and some winds and things like that, some rain when the bands came through. But we weren't going to get the brunt of the storm. And it wasn't until a few hours later that it was too late to make a decision to get out. The interstates were already gridlocked, so we made the decision to stay home because it was going to be safer at home than to be in a car in the middle of the interstate while at that time it was going to be a Cat 3, Cat 4. So we decided to stay home at that point. And then once we realized that we're now going to be hit almost head on by this thing, plans and actions changed. And so that's why I said, when the rains and the winds first started, everybody put their shoes on. The dog had her collar and leash on, just to make sure, because when these trees start falling, which they did here, you don't know if you're going to be able to get out of your house, and you're praying that you can. And so, yeah, so that's what I did. That was the beginning of the storm. The rest of the storm was a huge panic attack for the next 6 to 8 hours because that storm slowed down and then stopped on top of us.
Yeah. That's I've actually had a few people, like, not in a demeaning way, but ask, like, what was your thought process that you decided to stay?
Yeah.
Because somebody made the comment on my Instagram right before the storm. They were like, this is like a prepper Super Bowl. Like, this is when you find out if your preps are really on point or not, because you're about to be tested. And I had somebody ask me after the fact, why did we stay? And I'm like, based on the information we had the night before, when we really were still in a point the night before, like, we had that discussion the night before and said, if we're going to go, we pack up, we leave right now. We're in the best position to leave right now. If we do, it's either the roads are going to be gridlocked, but they're not going to be as bad as they will in the morning. If we're going to leave, we leave right now. And if we don't leave right now, we're staying until this is over. And we decided stay. At the time, based on the initial track, and really the track until the daggum thing made landfall, that's when things really got squirrely. And the predicted strength, which I think we were anticipating it was going to be a Cat 4.
Yeah.
But the initial track had it going a good 30, 40 miles further west, which may not sound like a lot for a hurricane this size, but we were anticipating, where we live, 60-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah.
Which is nothing.
That's the thunderstorms that are coming through tomorrow.
Yeah. Really and truly wasn't worried about it. Now, what happened was...
See, what had happened was...
Yeah. The hurricane made landfall. It immediately slowed down. It did not start losing strength like they usually do. We found out about that after the fact.
Yeah, this storm actually did something that meteorologists said hasn't happened in quite some time. In fact, it was the first time that today's technology has ever picked it up, and it's called the brown ocean effect, where the storm feeds itself from the heat of the land. So as it's pouring out the rain, that rain is heating up from the heat of the land, and it's just feeding the storm, which made it get the intensity grew as it made landfall, which doesn't happen when it reaches the land. It's when it starts to dissipate. But this didn't happen. It just grew stronger as it grew came over the land.
Yep. And it slowed down, and it hooked east.
Yeah.
And when it hooked east,
towards us.
It went from, initially, it was just about supposed to bullseye Baton Rouge. It might have been a little east of that, but not by much. And over the course of the day, we saw the track just move. And the eye wall of the storm actually wound up hitting Hammond, Louisiana, which is where both sets of our parents live, in that general area. And that's where the eye wall went. And we're 20 miles east of them. So it changed the prospects dramatically, because we were dealing with by the time it got up to us, it was a much stronger storm than what we had ever really expected it to be. And it was much closer to us. So whereas we expected 60-mile-an-hour winds, we wound up with 130-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah, and if you can imagine, we're sitting in this house. There's no electricity. Obviously, you've lost electricity, so you can hear things a lot. It's very loud, and the wind is blowing, and trees are falling. And the way that it sounded to me, like the way that my brain processed that, was demons swirling around outside trying to find us and get inside. I know that sounds super crazy, but that is like the image in my brain was just this rushing around the house. And there was one point where one of the Patreons for the podcast, we were in constant communication as long as we could be before the phone lines fell into the river. I was just counting the trees as they fell. 1 tree, 2 tree, 8 trees. And then I'm on the phone with my family. I'm on like this 4-way call or whatever. And I'm right outside this room is the hall that we bunkered down in. But I'm in the kitchen living room area. And then all of a sudden the house just shook, and this tree fell on the front of the house. And I was right there in the front of the house.
Wow.
And that's when the panic attacks has already started. So I look out the front door, and all you see is trees. Like, there's just, you can't get out of the front of the house. You can't get out of the garage. The tree has totally engulfed the house. And we didn't know at the time that the roof was damaged. It had hit the roof in several spots. We had holes in the roof. We still are living under a blue roof right now because, I mean,
But we're going to have a roof before hurricane season this year. So, you know, life goes.
Hopefully, fingers crossed, they get back to us. I mean, we're one of hundreds of thousands of people that are living under a blue tarped roof right now. But yeah, so that is how, in my brain, I was envisioning this whole whistling demon thing around us, trying to find us and get in. And we're huddled underneath blankets and pillows and praying to God that these giant oak trees and pine trees don't just split the house in half with us in it.
And you guys had never evacuated previously for any other storms?
We evacuated for Katrina.
Okay.
Katrina was the last storm that was this high intensity of a storm. The other storms have always, since we've been here, have been a 1 or a 2. And a 1 or a 2 are just, Phil and I decided that that's really just not, I mean, that's a springtime storm to us. You know, that's not something that we want to uproot our entire life for a week to evacuate.
Yeah. And I mean, especially like a Cat 2, you're talking about being power out for 48 to 72 hours. I mean, just, this is highly variable. It depends on where you live. But like in our experience, Cat 2 hurricane blows through, we're out of power for 2 or 3 days. Yep. And quite frankly, I got a 5K generator out there. I'm not that concerned about being out of power for 2 or 3 days. We just run a couple extension cords and keep things going, and we'll spend lots of time sitting outside, cooking over a campfire. It'd be like camping.
Yeah.
But, you know, Cat 3, that is normally the point at which we start to get pretty concerned. At that point, it really is a function of how close is it going to get to us. And Cat 4, like, in hindsight, we should have left for Ida. You know, we made it through okay, but in hindsight, we should have left. But hindsight's a real hard thing to hinge a decision on when the information you had at the beginning of the day and the information you had at 8 p.m. that night were completely opposite.
Yeah.
When I heard you tell that story the first time, I was just like, of course, me being a dad, I felt the exact same way. You know, you're like, you always want to trust that you'll make the best decision. And I'm an odds guy. You know, I go by the numbers and I look, and I'm like, okay, if this is what it looks like, then I'm going to take my chances. And sometimes you just roll your dice, and sometimes you get stuck, right? And
yeah.
So, man, well, you said your daughter's 9.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, without, I mean, you don't have to go into whole, like, that's got to be tough, right? I mean, we're pretty lucky up here. We don't get a lot of really shitty weather. But did you make any special preps ahead of time? You know, I mean, we all think about our kids and prep for our kids, but that's got to be hard. Like you said, you know, panic attacks and stuff, and you try to hold it together when you're there. But you know, and you don't have a basement, right? I assume.
No.
It'd be a swimming pool.
Right? Yeah. You guys know the Tragically Hip song "New Orleans is Sinking"? I don't know if you do or not, but yeah. Anyway,
No, I haven't, but I understand the sentiment.
Yeah. So what did you do? You go in the center of the house with her, did you? Or?
Yeah, we all went into the hallway where there's no windows, and so we made sure all the doors were closed. And we just tried, you know, we played Uno, and we prayed together. We were praying. I was praying constantly, but we did. We said a couple of prayers together, and there was no masking the fear. I mean, I don't have a poker face, and so she knew I was afraid, and she knew that Dad was afraid because Phil couldn't hide it at that point.
No.
I think once, you know, tree fell, it was kind of hard to...
But, I mean, my daughter also knows, like, just as a function of my personality, when things get really, really scary, I usually just get, like, I get really almost unemotional, you know what I'm saying? And my daughter knows at 9 years old that when Dad gets into this certain mode where he's not showing emotion, it's a serious situation. It's life or death. Because Dad doesn't get like this unless it's a life or death situation.
And she knew. I mean, she's smart. She understood what was happening, and she understood, I think, as much of a 9-year-old could understand just how intense and dangerous the situation we were in. And, we just put our trust in the Lord that we were going to make it through, and just made it through.
Yeah. I mean,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Phil.
oh no, I'm trying to remember. Gillian probably knows, because Gillian didn't. I don't think she slept until
didn't.
about 4 o'clock that morning. My daughter and I actually eventually fell asleep. Like,
Yeah, they fell asleep. The dog fell asleep. The dog, she has, her anxiety whenever thunder, whatever happens.
Yeah.
And so I give her CBD oil in little cheese balls. So she falls asleep and she's like, whatever, man.
That's a great prep. I never thought of that. Okay.
Yeah. So I have bottles of CBD oil. That is one thing, in fact, for Ida that we did. I had run out, and so I made sure that we went to the store and got some more for her.
Yep.
Yeah, you got it. We think about the dogs and the cats. We have just as much as we prep our food, we're prepping their food as well.
yeah. But this is also where, like, Gillian and I work really well as a team, because, like, I'm laser focused on certain aspects of prepping, and everything I don't think of, because I don't know, I'm stupid about some things. Like, I had bags of dog food, bags of cat food, cat litter. I had all that stuff. I totally forgot about the dog CBD oil. She's the one that thought of it. Like, this is why I always tell everybody, I'm like, if you can get your spouse to buy into prepping with you, the two of you will come up with so much of a better prepping plan together than you will by yourself, because they'll think of everything you don't. I don't think to get candy bars for my daughter when she's having a bad day. This lady does.
Listen, our youngest, the only two that live at home, are 11. They're going to be 12 right away. 12-year-old twin girls. And my wife, I'm really good at prepping for a lot of things. I am. But the other day she said, we need to fill in a certain area of preps. And so she put in an order for Walmart, and 2 great big boxes showed up from Walmart of feminine hygiene products.
Yes.
It's going to be a thing right away. And we can tell, trust me. Right? So,
I'm sorry. We'll say a prayer for you.
yes, please do. These are girl number 3 and 4 for us. So yeah, I get it. But anyway, but yeah, so yes, we do, right? And how awesome is it to have a supportive partner who fills in your gaps, though? Hey.
Yeah, and that's why I like to do the show and come on as a guest on Phil's podcast, because I would venture to say that 90% of the people who listen to his podcast are men, and a lot of them are laser focused like him. And so I'm always on there going, girls, go get your pads, go get your tampons, go get all your stuff that you're going to need, your over-the-counter medication, whatever you're going to need, because you may not be able to get to the store. We weren't able to get to the store for 3 weeks? Yeah.
Oh, really?
That sounds about right.
There were some places that didn't get electricity back my parents didn't get electricity back for 4 weeks. We got it back about a week and a half.
8 days.
Yeah. After the storm hit.
We were out of power for 8 days. My parents were out of power an additional 2 or 3 after that. Your parents were out for 4 weeks, because her parents live way further out into the woods than my parents do. My parents are closer to town, so their power is stored faster. We're in the suburbs, so our power is only out 8 days. But for comparison's sake, I mean, we got our teeth kicked in pretty good on this deal, but there are parts of Louisiana, like south of New Orleans, closer to the Gulf Coast, that there's nothing left. There's nothing standing taller than a blade of grass down there.
Yeah.
Whole communities, houses pushed off the slabs. Storm surge came up so high it flooded raised houses. That is like a 2-story house, but the bottom story is nothing but pylons. Flooded out those houses because the storm surge is so high. Like places where you cannot rebuild your home because there's not a hardware store left in town or 50 miles away from town for you to go get building materials to rebuild if there's anything left.
Yeah.
No gas stations for 50 to 75 miles. So
People
you'll burn
from-
half a tank just going there and coming back.
Yeah.
You know,
People
to
were
get
going
tank gas.
all the way to Baton Rouge or to Biloxi to get gas, up to probably Jackson area, Mississippi, to find gas. Gas was out. We were gone. I mean, it was gone.
We actually heard about a gentleman that either bought or had a trailer, but he basically had six 55-gallon drums that he was taking to Biloxi, and he was filling them up in Biloxi and then bringing them back down to New Orleans to family he had in the area using a siphon pump to fill up all their 5-gallon cans, keep their generators running. And he was making that trip every couple of days to Biloxi to fill up 55 gallons times 6, 300 something gallons of fuel. Because you couldn't get, if you could get fuel around here, and that wasn't for several days, by the way, I mean, they weren't rationing it, but quite frankly, you might get stabbed if you try to get more than 10
There
gallons
were a
at
lot
a
of
time.
fights at the gas station. But, too, you have to think, for the first probably 3 to 4 days, there's not going to be any traffic because there's trees all over the place. There's power lines down. And at one point, soon after the storm, there was curfews, and only emergency vehicles were allowed on the roads. You couldn't be out. And if you were ticketed, and, depending on what was going on, you could have been arrested. That's just how dangerous it was.
So you said you didn't sleep till about 4 a.m. So was the storm over when you got up in the morning?
Yes. The storm made landfall about 6 o'clock, 5 or 6 o'clock. And then it, like I said, it sat on top of us until about 3 o'clock in the morning. And wow. So for about 9 hours, we're in pretty intense rains and, winds and all that stuff. And I finally went to sleep. It was still windy and it was still raining, but there was no trees falling. And when we woke up the next morning, which was probably about 6 o'clock in the morning, we had to go out the back of the house to walk around to the front of the house because the trees had just fallen around the entire house. And it was still raining. It was still very windy. And I took a picture of this, and I will never, ever forget it. And it's just a testament to who our daughter is. The first thing she does is she runs into her bedroom and gets her kite so that she can fly her kite in the wind outside. And there is probably 30 trees. You can't even see our front yard. You can't see the front of the house. My car is covered in a tree. Oh, wow. And she's out in the driveway or in the street flying a kite. Because the winds were perfect, Mom.
The winds were perfect that morning. They were nice and consistent.
So where did you start? What did you do? Like, you got trees down everywhere. You have to go out your back.
I cried.
Yeah. Well, for step one was a cigar and a little bit of like pull our heads together. Thank God we'd made it through the night.
Yep.
We were our first priority was actually try to reestablish communication because like we have, I have a couple of Army buddies in the local area. Gillian has a lot of friends in the local area. Our parents aren't too far away, and they were closer to the eye wall than we were. And AT&T, who's our cell provider, their service was out in the entirety of like the New Orleans metro area, maybe even all of South Louisiana.
Yeah, they're giant. What are they called? The poles that the wires go up. You know what that is?
The cell tower?
Yes, the cell towers. Thank you. They fell into the river.
Wow.
I thought that was the high power lines going into New Orleans.
That was the AT&T. That's why everyone didn't have have cell service.
Phenomenal.
So we couldn't get in touch with our parents, and to the point where we were leave our house as it is, get the plate care, all the stuff, get the guns, get everything, and we've got to go lay eyes on them. I know that Andrew had somehow figured out how to get in contact with my sisters my twin sister lives in North Louisiana, so she was out of it completely, and was trying to see if I had contacted her. He hadn't heard from Phil, and it was really scary because once, like 2 days later, once we did get cell service back and we were able to log.
That was the first day.
About 4 o'clock, yeah.
About 4 or 5 p.m. But it was the first day after the hurricane because we had already decided that if we hadn't heard from them by like 8 o'clock the next morning, we were loading up.
And going, yeah.
I mean, it was going to be an adventure to get to them. But at that point, we were like, we've got family that could be stuck in a house under a tree. We have to go find them.
But it was really eye-opening because I logged onto Facebook and I'm tagged in all these posts. Have you heard from Gillian? Has anyone seen Gillian or Phil? We've lost communication. It was it was really scary. It was scary. And my twin sister finally, when I got in touch with her, she's like, we're coming. We're coming.
Yeah. Now, the second order of business right behind that was this has been like a recurring theme with me, because like I had had people trying to talk to me for quite a while, saying, "Hey, Phil, you really should have a chainsaw at the house." But but up to this point in my life, I've never been in the position where I needed a chainsaw, or I had just gone out and bought one. I've got a bow saw. I have an axe. I mean, I cut down a tree in the front yard with an axe. Not a few months before the hurricane. I'm a physically strong enough guy to work that. And I just never needed a chainsaw. So it was on the list, but it was on the list underneath get the generator straightened out, which didn't happen because we all got sick for a couple of weeks. So it was on the list. It wasn't high priority. When 2 oak trees were sitting on the house, it immediately went to the top of the priority list. But the first thing I had to deal with a bow saw and an axe was I had to get enough of the tree cut out that I could get Gillian's Jeep out of the driveway and assess how bad the damage was. Because at first, the whole front of the Jeep from about the windshield forward is stuck in this tree. We can't even see if she has popped tires. We can't tell if the windshield's smashed. We don't know how bad the damage is. And my biggest worry at that point was I first need to know if I have 1 or 2 working vehicles to evacuate this family if I have to. We have full gas tanks, but if the car's smashed, it's not doing us any good. So that was like priority number 1, was cut enough of this tree out that I could get her Jeep out. And we got it out. It was fine. It's got some dents in the fender and the hood, but it was drivable. And then get enough of it cut that we could like shut the garage door again. Because we opened the garage door, part of the tree popped into the garage.
Right? Like Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I can't remember if was that first day after Ida, or it was the first day, because second day we pretty much just cooled our heels waiting on your sister and your brother-in-law to come down. But that first day I also got up on the roof and cut probably the biggest limb that was sitting on top of the roof of the house. Cut that, got it off. That way at least I could stabilize the house and say that the weight of the tree sitting on it's not going to do further damage to aggravate the problem. And after that, it was really about taking stock of where we were at. Our utilities were completely out. Power was out.
Water was out because a tree had landed on the
water tank that
water
services
tank.
the subdivision.
Yeah.
And we actually heard that during the storm. Like, I heard a tree fall, and then I heard this loud hissing noise. I looked at Gillian, I'm like, I promise you that's the water tank across the way. So, like, we're not going to have running water in the morning. Fortunately, we've got 35 gallons tapped, a 35-gallon can tapped into the downspout. So every time we get a half inch of rain, I got 35 extra gallons back there, and we've got, I think, a 28-day supply of bottled water sitting on the shelf. So I mean, we weren't in awful shape, but we really had to take stock that morning of this is what we need in the immediate future to sustain our lives. We need water, we need food, we need shelter. Do we have those things? Because if we don't have those things, there's no discussion to be had about do we stay here or do we leave. We have to leave. Wow. We had the ability to leave if we needed to, but the first discussion that had to be had was, do we have the things we need to live here? Doesn't have to be comfortable, just live. And we came to the decision pretty quickly that yes, we can stand up here. We have the things we need. We actually started taking 5-gallon buckets, a bucket at a time, out of that 35-gallon trash can that stays full because it's tapped into the downspouts on the house. We were using that to fill the toilet, to flush the toilet. We were using that to give ourselves bucket baths. I mean, we were using that to wash hands. So every time it rains, I've got 35 more gallons of water sitting out there. I wouldn't drink it unless your butt was against a wall, but it's something to take the strain off the potable water supply. And food wasn't a problem. Honestly, boiling water wasn't even a problem. We've got, I mean, we're pretty avid campers. So we have propane tanks. We have the little green tanks that everybody hates buying because they're like $8 a whack and they're gone, pretty quickly. We still had gas service at the house, oddly enough.
Oh.
So our gas range, hell, our gas hot water heater. When the water service got restored, we had hot showers.
Yeah. People don't realize how resilient natural gas is.
Yes.
I've got my generator plugged in, like, piped in. That's my number one. And you always get the guys on YouTube. They're like, oh yeah, emergency. They're going to shut it down, or, the world ends. Well, okay, we'll deal with that later. But it's all buried, right? So it's almost immune to storms. I mean, yes, could it still happen? But yeah, that's cool. I never thought. I was going to ask you about natural gas. So, so you get up and, information first. And so how did you, yeah, I guess we'll jump ahead a little bit, but you said your twin sister, they were the ones that showed up. Were they?
Yeah, they showed up 2 days later. They had to stop. They stopped in Lafayette at my other sister's house first. They stopped at my parents' house and dropped off a generator and supplies to them, and then they came to our house because out of everyone's damage that we were able to assess from the whole entire family in the area, ours was the worst. And so like the cavalry, they came in with a trailer full of gas. They came in with chainsaws. They were here. And then, so my brother-in-law and nephew work for AT&T. And so they're out constantly in cutting down trees and doing all this other stuff for AT&T. So we had a path cleared to the front door that afternoon once they got here. They live a kind of similar lifestyle to us, but not. They live. They're very religious. They live off the land, kind of thing. I wouldn't say like they're Pentecostal, but they're sort of Pentecostal. Okay. And so. And the reason I'm saying that is because their roles in their marriage are not what I think people today would be like, oh, yeah, that's what I want. So they get here, and my brother-in-law gets out of the car and looks at my sister and says, start cooking. They've got to eat. Because, I mean, at that point, I didn't want to eat. I was so... I had to get, everything else done, and food was the last thing on my mind. And so my sister is literally we live on a cul-de-sac. She's in the middle of the street underneath a 10-foot tent. And she is just, there's a buffet in the front yard, and she's cooking, and she's cleaning. And it was another time that I started to cry, because we're sitting there and we're looking at this tree in front of our house. My sister's cooking us meals, 2-3 hours earlier. My daughter's flying a kite in the wind, and it's just kind of like you're still in shock. You're trying to not think about what you just went through, but you see it in plain view of everything that you just went through. And I think that's also when we figured out that our neighbors were some of them we were able to rely on, but not really. Most of them had left. They didn't want to stay in the heat, and they just decided, none of them are preppers like we are, so they left and found hotel rooms on this, the Gulf Coast somewhere in Alabama, Florida, and waited it out until power came back on over there. And so at one point, it was just us on the street, and there was no one else to help. Everyone else in the neighborhood that had stayed, they're also cutting trees off of their house. And so my sister and brother-in-law and their kids stayed for just a few days. We all huddled in the living room where we could run extension cords to a small AC window unit. And we were able to get the house down to in this, mid-70s at night. And it was comfortable enough that everybody could get a good night's sleep. And you have to remember, this is late August, early September, the hottest month of the year down here. And we are literally outside from morning until the sun goes down, trying to repair and everything else. So that's when, I posted something on Facebook, like I think either the day before or the day this storm hit. And it's something that you see a lot down here, and it said you're about to see what this country is all about after this storm, and what it meant was people that we don't know, black, white, red, polka dot, are going to put everything aside, and they're going to help their neighbor. And I'm going to start crying, Tim.
Okay.
It was 2 days, at least 2 days. You had people from all over the country that came down here in droves, walking up to your house saying, where can we help? What can we do? What do you need? Different church organizations, I'm telling you, different colors in skin. It didn't matter if you voted red or blue, they wanted to help you. There were many nights where we ate food, like a friend would drop off food from churches that were cooking for everyone. I remember this one group that came, and we had done about as much as we could with this tree. We were all exhausted, but there were still trees in the front yard, and we were just going to leave them until whenever.
Yeah.
We had this.
It was the largest piece of the base of one of the stumps. Mm-hmm. It was still 8 feet out of the wood line into our yard, and my brother-in-law had bought and brought me my first chainsaw, and he brought his, which made mine look, like a starter saw. But neither one of us had enough chainsaw to cut this stump. I mean, the stump was it was just too big.
Yeah.
It was the kind of thing that he would have gone and borrowed like a Stihl 46 series or something to cut, but he didn't have that, and neither did I. And bunch of gentlemen, I think they were
group of Mormons.
Yep, group of Mormons
showed up at our front door and
from Alabama.
Yeah, said, I hear you need some help. And I was like, you think? Super sweet. And they had that tree cut out of our front yard in 20 minutes.
And then went to the neighbor's house.
And they just went down the street and cutting trees off of people's houses. It was hard. It was hard to see. And it wasn't until Andrew came down the beginning of this month that we actually got our front yard back to normal, air quotes.
Yeah.
It was, I don't want to, when I first heard you tell the story, I don't know what kind of reader you are or not, but I read the Going Home books that post their, anyway. And in there, the community comes together, or at least some of them do. Mm-hmm. And then some leave to go to the FEMA camps, right? Of course, because that's what they do as well. And a lot of what you told, it almost felt like it was out of a book, like it was just so crazy, because you talked about some of your neighbors. Was it an elderly lady or a daughter and a mother? And they weren't, they tried to help, but they didn't have a lot to help with. Was that right?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. You're probably thinking of our neighbor across the street and her sister.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and just for clarification's sake, there's exactly one what I would consider strong, able-bodied male capable of large amounts of physical labor, and I'm in on the whole street.
It's all women.
it's all divorcees and widowers, and then the one couple on the corner that I don't know what kind of skills either one of them have, but we've talked to them exactly one time in 4 years, so I kind of think they're ghosts. So yeah. It was just one of those situations where, when the trees landed on the house, I had two problems. First of all was a severe lack of tools. I didn't have a chainsaw in my hands. And even if I had a chainsaw, me and Gillian by ourselves would have really had a lot of eating to do to get through that poop sandwich. I mean,
Right?
And as much as your sister, was a boost to us, because, she took so much of the, meals and cleaning and just keeping things picked up, and her two teenage daughters just trying to keep Piper entertained and take that load off of the two of us.
Yep.
Which allowed you and myself and our brother-in-law and our nephew, the four of us went out there and tackled trees. And as long as my brother-in-law was running the chainsaw, the rest of us were dragging stuff out, piling it up. We ended up with about an 8-foot tall brush pile in the front yard. After 2 days.
Probably 15, 16 feet.
About that.
Wide.
Yeah. It was a pretty good little pile. If we'd been in a more rural area, it'd have been a hell of a fun bonfire.
Right.
But it was close enough to the wood line in our home that I was absolutely not going to throw a match at it. Despite the temptation.
How'd you do it?
Huh?
The parish, they after these hurricanes, they hired these tree companies that come in and they load them into these giant trucks, and then they bring them to an area that it's just like an open field, and I don't remember how many cubic feet of like dead trees that had fallen. I'd have to get that number to you, but I know that if you're flying over, you can see it, and it's very visible. These lines of just trees that, the brush and stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was just gonna say like that. That's been one thing that really came out of Hurricane Ida was, Hurricane Katrina was a rainmaker, dumped just a torrent of rain on the city, and that's why the levee broke, because of the sheer volume of water that was running by it and pushing up against it. And Ida really didn't produce that much rain. Ida was a windmaker. Ida held its strength so much further inland than anybody expected. The wind speed was, it's still Category 3 by the time it got up to us, which is really unusual. Like a Cat 4, we were expecting about a Cat 2 by the time it got all the way up here. Mm-hmm. And we were expecting it to take 2-3 hours and blow by us. These are not naive. This isn't naivety. This is like, 39 and 38 years of collective experience looking at hurricanes as lay people, and we just kind of thought we knew what to expect. But the wind speed, and you can even see that in terms of like power distribution damage, because I think when it was all said and done, Entergy, which is one of our largest power distribution companies in this area, they had 4 times as many power poles hit the ground for Hurricane Ida as Hurricane Katrina.
Wow.
And those numbers are borne out throughout all these networks. The amount of damage done in terms of lines down, poles snapped, trees down, was dramatically higher for Ida than it was Katrina, despite it being a physically smaller storm. I think the worst part of Ida was about half the size of Hurricane Katrina.
Wow.
In terms of the eye, it was definitely half the size from what I could see on the radar. But Ida made a ton of wind. It knocked a lot of trees down, and that was the biggest. I think that was the biggest effect a lot of people saw was the wind.
Was it? Do you think overall did it cause more damage than Katrina? Mm-mm. Or no?
I don't believe so. Not from what I've seen, and I feel like I think a lot of what made Katrina cause more damage was, first of all, just raw size. Katrina was twice as large of a storm, despite both being Category 4s. Katrina just had a much larger damage area. Katrina did tons of damage because of the levee breach in New Orleans and in Gulfport and in Biloxi. I think the most populous city to really get hurt by this was probably Hammond. Honestly, if you look at the path Ida took, it annihilated a lot of these smaller communities down in South Louisiana, but none of them are like major metro areas. You know what I'm saying? Like it could run over 10 towns and not affect the number of people that hitting New Orleans would. So I think in terms of like dollars of damage, lives affected, Katrina's going to hold that crown. But in terms of like the people who were devastated, I don't think anybody wants to come out on the winning end of that, because, like I said, there's communities in South Louisiana that
haven't come back.
It might be 5 years, might be 10. There's some that will never come back, because like when I was after Katrina, when I was working down in New Orleans for an air conditioning contractor, there were houses where the homeowner had gotten their insurance money, and they started rebuilding their house. And there'd be a street where the whole street got devastated, the whole street got flooded. There'd be about half the houses that had new siding, new roofs, and they were getting rebuilt, and everything else looked like the day after Hurricane Katrina. Just because the people got their money, and they said to heck with it and left. And they never came back. And these were families that lived in like Chalmette, for example, for generations, and they will never go back because of the damage that was done, because of the loss, the family keepsakes, the picture albums, the antiques. It's all gone. It was all destroyed, and they'll never go back home. But you see that blight even years and years later, where there's houses that there used to be a family here, and wherever they are not coming back.
So what did that even do to the property values of the houses that did rebuild, right? Like, I mean, not to, I mean, that's not the only thing. I really am. Like,
Yeah.
you've got these people that have rebuilt their houses that are now surrounded by houses that look like they should maybe have been in Detroit at one time. Like that's a sin.
It's still a fight. I think, there are still people suing suing their neighbors for their blighted property.
Oh,
In New Orleans, and I mean, it was just recently in the news. I think before Ida hit, there was some big name in New Orleans that was being sued because of all of his blighted property from Katrina left over in New Orleans. So I mean, it's still Katrina. It will never that name will never go away. We will always talk about Katrina. We will now always talk about Ida. But there are parts of New Orleans that you go down there and you can still see it was left exactly how it was the day after Katrina hit. And it still looks like that.
Yeah.
So how long was it for you guys after Ida? I don't want to say back to normal, but at least, living, power, water, everything running proper. How long was that?
8 days power came back because it was fairly late in the evening on a Sunday evening, I think.
I don't remember.
No, wait. Let's do the math on this. Ida hit on Sunday night.
Sure.
Okay.
I don't remember.
I have to look back at the calendar to be sure, but Sunday night sounds right. Yeah, I think it was Sunday evening that our power finally came back. Now, if I remember right, our internet line took an extra 12 to 18 hours before that got reestablished. But let's see here. Water was out immediately after Ida. That started to come back the next day. Apparently, somebody from the parish must have come out and fixed whatever the problem was, at least patched it, and water pressure started off about 3 p.m. the next day, slowly coming back. The taps would trickle. So I'd put a 5-gallon pail underneath each one of the spouts on both the bathtubs and just run them full blast, I mean, I don't want to waste the water, so I'd go back and check on them, but I wanted to fill those as much as possible from what meager water pressure we had so that I was not continuing to dip into the 35 gallons of non-potable on the back porch, try to sustain things.
I would say, to answer your question, about 2.5 weeks, almost 3 weeks after the storm hit, were things getting back to normal. My business reopened about 2.5 weeks after the storm hit. Schools were back in session. So about 3 weeks.
Yeah, I would say our personal situation, call it 8-9 days. I mean, at that point, you still can go to a grocery store to save your life.
Wow.
Gas, you still had to kind of find out from your friends which station had gas because it was one of those situations where the more houses were out of power, the more houses were running generators to stay lit.
Yep.
And as the public utility recovered and brought more and more houses online, it eased the strain on the gas supply.
Yep.
So those two things almost work in an inverse relationship. Yep. When lots of houses were out of power, the gas availability was severely restricted because there were so many people trying to fill up 5-gallon cans to keep the generator running. And then as the number of houses without power dropped, gas availability came up to the point where every station had fuel. And it wasn't like no station had fuel. It was just you got fuel today, and everybody in town was going to be pumping out of your tank until you ran dry.
Right.
And then once you were out, you were out. And the next station would get their delivery, and then they'd be in the same boat. And it just worked like that for a while. I mean, we never let our tanks get below, I think, 3/4 for a couple of weeks. And we were able to find fuel.
Yep.
You just knew every gallon of fuel is precious. Don't waste it. Don't screw around with it. Don't let your tank get below 3/4. And we just had to kind of live that way for a while.
That's cool. And information. So knowing which station had fuel and where you could go, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that was a lot of word of mouth. I mean, I know a lot of people would try to use Gas Buddy and different websites like that, but I honestly found I found some of the best information, the best what we call, the technical term is human intelligence.
Yep.
just good old-fashioned surf the frickin' internet, look at Facebook, talk to your friends in the area. They'll tell you what's going on. And having that network of people where, like, person A tells person B, hey, there's gas at the Quick Mart. And person B tells person C, and person C tells person D. You don't know where down that chain of information you are, but you can still disseminate it so that everybody down below you knows if you go to the Quick Mart, there's gas there.
It's like the old-fashioned prayer chains, you know?
It has to be that way, especially in an area like this that's been so radically affected in that short of a time frame. I mean, there is never going to be a chain of information delivery system that can match word of mouth. Like, it's human intelligence is notoriously unreliable from like a military standpoint. But if you want to talk about broken supply chains and broken information chains and speed, it's hard to beat word of mouth in that situation. Having a little group of friends that think like you do helps a lot in that situation.
That's good. What did you learn? Like, I mean, I know you touched on it a bunch, but
chainsaw.
Yeah, I was going to say, okay, let's start. How about holes in your preps first? I mean, because I talk to you, Phil. You know your shit. I mean, I love talking to you because we think the same way in some ways, but I've learned a lot from you already. And obviously, you run a friggin' podcast on prepping, but you still had holes, right?
Yeah, and I would argue everybody's going to. Like, the thing I've been very upfront about, and I've talked about it, Andrew's talked about it, Gillian's talked about it. Every time Andrew or I, because we're just the two of us are on the podcast together more often, and Gillian comes in when she's able or willing. Invited. But, like, every time we have one of those situations that we feel in some small ways test our preps. Like, Andrew had a situation where he was just out having a beer for lunch with one of his roommates, and a gentleman passed out from heat stroke out in the parking lot. Now, he's a first responder, and so is his roommate. So they both ran out there and grabbed the go bags and started working on this guy to rejuvenate him. And we talk about those kinds of things, and we're very frank and very honest with our listeners about where we didn't nail it. Yeah. Like, what we felt faltered on. Because I always feel like if you're honest with yourself, you learn more from screwing up than you do by doing it right. And I would rather every person out there learn from my mistakes so that you don't have to pay for them in your own skin. Mm-hmm. So, problem number one, I didn't have a chainsaw. I had an axe, I had a bow saw, and I was woefully unprepared to deal with 2 oak trees in my front yard. Fair. Problem number two, that 5K generator, that, by the way, was like an awesome addition to our preps, I had on my mind to give it a good service, to check it out, make sure it was running all ready to go for hurricane season, and then my whole family came down with COVID. Mm-hmm. So that was like 2 weeks, 2.5, 3 weeks, where like the three of us, our daughter, she sailed through without breaking a sweat. You and I got kicked in the butt pretty hard.
Yeah.
And it was probably about 2-3 more weeks after I stopped running fever and having the chills that I even felt back up on my feet like I could mow my lawn and stuff. I mean, I had a little bout of long COVID, and it took me some time to get the wind back in my sails. So the expectation that I would give this generator a good service before hurricane season didn't really happen. Mm-hmm. And when I pulled the ripcord on that thing after Ida, it was not running well. It was misbehaving, it was sputtering, surging, coughing, had to run the choke about halfway on to keep it lit. It was cantankerous, to be polite. And yeah, those were like not the only, but those were 2 enormous holes. I had a piece of equipment I desperately needed that I did not have because it was low priority at the time. Yep. And I had another piece of equipment that at the moment I needed to lean on it, it was not up to the task. And that was actually something else that our brother-in-law helped me out with. He heard the generator not running well, so he went out there, and he and I, with a screwdriver and a flashlight, took the carburetor apart on the back deck and like cleaned it as best we could. I think I didn't have carb cleaner. All I had was rubbing alcohol. And we realized that the air filter had actually disintegrated, got sucked into the carb, which was part of the reason why it was misbehaving so bad. It was one of those foamy air filters.
Yeah.
So after we dug as much of that as we could, we used one of my old T-shirts from the garage with a spritz of WD-40 on it to make air filters.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
It worked.
No, it really didn't work. It worked okay.
Yeah.
But that was, and since, I mean, I'm being honest with, where I felt like I screwed up, rectifying those problems. My brother-in-law brought me a chainsaw. I happily paid him what he wanted for it. Didn't even care what it cost at that point.
Yep.
And problem number 2 was rectified by buying a spark plug, an air filter, a carburetor, a fuel filter, a fuel line kit in duplicate.
Yes.
So I bought 2 of everything, put one whole set of parts into the generator, which, by the way, runs like a striped butt ape at this point, and put all the other parts into a vacuum bag. And it stays out in the shed with all the fuel with the generator, so that if ever again this happens, I got every part I can need to rip the thing apart and put it back right.
And you know how to do it too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Good. And I gotta say, I don't know. I don't blame you for not having a chainsaw. I mean, you don't run a landscaping business. You don't have a wood burning appliance in your home, do you?
Nope.
No. So I get it, but I see where that is a long ways down a prep list. There's a lot of things you could buy before you need a chainsaw in New Orleans or Louisiana,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also like I point out to people, like to your point about landscaping or having a wood burning appliance in your house. I point out to people, I'm like, there's all different kinds of preppers out there, and in my case, we live in the suburbs because my job kind of ties me to this area, and I can't get too far out in the sticks just yet. And at the time Gillian and I bought this house, we were both working in New Orleans, like in the city.
Yeah.
I'm pointing over my shoulder because it's south of us, but like we were both working in New Orleans, and this was the best place for us to be. It was a low crime area. Schools were much better up here. A lot less traffic. It was not as much less traffic as there used to be, but much less traffic. You don't have to worry about getting shot in your front yard, which is nice.
That's a bonus.
So, and on the flip side of all this, like I live in the suburbs, there's some things that are, I would say, lower priority, and some things that are just frankly impossible. Like I'm never going to be able to plant an acre because I don't have it. I have a backyard, and a very small one at that. Our neighbors had chickens for a while, pretty much just turned into an invitation for rats to take over their backyard. And since the backyard's so small, I don't want chickens in the yard anyway, because I don't want rats all over. I mean, I wouldn't mind having chickens or ducks as long as I keep away from the house, because I don't want the rats that are going to follow them. But like, along with this whole conversation is, do I have the need for like a track hoe and a chainsaw? No.
Right.
I have the need for a lawnmower. I have the need for a leaf blower. I have a need for typical suburbanite lawn care stuff. And as a step above that, I had an axe. Mm-hmm. And yes, Gillian still laughs at the idea that I have this axe that I have cut down trees with. You've seen it.
Yeah.
But like if I needed to knock down a little tree, I'd go get the axe and I'd hack at it and take a break if I need to and hack at it some more. And it'd get the job done. It was a lot less expensive than a chainsaw. But at that moment in time after Ida, I just needed a chainsaw that I didn't have.
I get it. Yeah, I do. And maybe, I don't know. Yeah, whatever. You've got it now, and it's a piece of gas-powered equipment that you're probably not going to need a whole lot of for the next while, right?
You say that, but I have sure used the heck out of it since I got it.
That's what happens, What about you, Gillian? What did you, where were your holes, or where did you, feel that you learned a lesson from it,
Anti-anxiety meds?
Well,
Is it legal to smoke pot in Louisiana?
No, not unless a doctor prescribes it, unfortunately.
No, I don't know. I think, Phil has covered the 2 major holes that we had. My preps, it wasn't a big deal. We had the food, we had the water, we had the board games, we had, everything that we needed to be as comfortable as we could be, which is kind of what's kind of left up to me to fill in those holes whenever Phil's trying to prep and I'm trying to prep. So I didn't really have many holes, I would say. I do know that we won't sit through another storm like this again, and if we have any idea maybe it's going to come this way, we're still going to evacuate. you learn those lessons. I hate that we had to learn it the hard way. It was a night that we will never forget, and it was a night that took Piper probably 2 weeks to talk about, and she still doesn't want to talk about it. She'll talk with us, but she doesn't want to go into detail. I think it scared all three of us more than we thought it would, and there are still nights. For instance, 2 weeks ago or last week we had the thunderstorm that came through with the tornadoes, and all of the PTSD it's all still there. It's all still raw. Right back in the same hallway. Right back in the same hallway, doubled down, ready for this tornado to pass. I can tell you that it has firmed up my desire to continue to prep and to be ready. Phil and Andrew are very famous for saying, "What's your zombie?" And I
actually have to give credit where it's due, though. That's an Uncle Randyism.
Okay, well, Uncle Randy, what is your zombie? I mean, it's the perfect way to think about. It could be a snowstorm for you. It's hurricanes and thunderstorms for me. What is your zombie? And then how are you going to get through that zombie if that zombie were to come? What are you going to do? And it's hard to think about everything that you need to, and that's why Phil and I are so adamant about being a team and feeding off of each other. And I know that some people don't have that. They don't have that support system there, but you're always going to have holes. You're never going to be ready for everything 100%. Phil and I have been prepping for many, many years, and Ida threw us a curveball, and we weren't ready for some of it. So, you're always going to have holes.
But I would also say that that's like, and this is something Andrew and I have talked about before, and like I've asked military veterans, I've asked psychologists, I've asked everybody that I even thought might have an answer to this on the show. I've asked everybody, I'm like, how do you teach? You could call it mental resiliency, like in self.
Okay.
Yeah, in self-defense, we call it like the combat mindset. We call it situational awareness. There's a million terms for it in a million different places, but the idea is like, how do you train your brain to be able to deal with high stress environments? And I've asked everybody that, and nobody has a good answer except live it.
Going through high stress environments.
Which is not the way you want to learn how to deal with it. But it seems to be the only real answer. But I mean, the only thing I can tell everybody is, I'm like, you are going to have holes. Something's going to get screwed up. Something's not going to work right. The freaking generator's going to be running on like 3/4 of one cylinder. Something's going to go wrong. Right. And then you're going to have to put on your big boy pants or your big girl pants and look at the problem and say, can I fix this? Can I bypass it? What do I have that can make my life easier? How can I roll with the punches? Because you're going to have to roll with punches. You cannot plan for everything. You cannot predict everything. Something's going to go wrong. And when it does, the difference between the people who stand up and deal with the problems and lie down and die, or sit down and cry, are the people who can roll with the punches. It's going to be the people that say, I don't have a chainsaw, but I do have an axe, I do have a bow saw, and I do have a Jeep that needs to get freed up out of this tree in the front yard. Doesn't matter how long it's going to take. Doesn't matter how hard it is. I have these tools. Can I make these tools do the job? I have this generator. It doesn't run right. Can I like leave the choke halfway on and get this thing to keep going so I don't lose food in my fridge and my freezer? Can you work through the problems you're going to deal with? And almost as important as that is keeping your mind together. Because there was a moment that the day after Ida, I sat in the front yard and just had to cry. I mean, I was sitting on a stump looking at my house in the middle of a tree.
Right.
And I'm looking at a house that has no power and no air conditioning. I know we're looking forward to a very hot, miserable night. My wife and daughter are not in a happy situation. We just had a very harrowing experience 12 hours before that. And I just had to kind of sit down for a moment and think to myself, I'm like, wow, like this is not like the worst my life's ever been, but this is definitely a low water mark right now. Wow. And I had to pick myself up and realize that these two human beings still depend on me for safety, for security, for food, for water, for shelter, and I still have a responsibility I have to live up to. No matter how bad it hurts, no matter how upset I am, I have to stand up and deliver, and now it's time to do it. And the people who can do that when it's a bad day are the ones who are going to make it through. And the people that can't, that's when you just need to go stay in a hotel in Florida and not come back for a while.
Go to the beach.
Well, and that's nothing against those people. I mean, look, there were days I would have loved to have been sitting on a beach sucking down Mai Tais instead of being where we were. But I mean, those are the people, if you are not prepared emotionally and equipment-wise and preps to live in an environment like that, you've got to get out of it. It's the same thing I told several different people. Some I just met through social media. They were desperate to come back to Louisiana because they wanted to start to rebuild. They wanted to clean up their houses. And I literally pulled them aside in private messages and I said, do you have a generator, 20 gallons of fuel, and a week's supply of food and water? And if the answer was no, I said, don't you dare come back here right now.
Yeah.
Because if you do, you're going to endanger yourself, you're going to endanger your family. I am warning you as a person who is living in this situation with all the preps I have. This is not something to come back to right now unless you're ready for hell.
That's crazy. I don't know where else we could end it. That's perfect, man. I mean, I hate that you guys had to go through it, but I appreciate that you're willing to tell your story, like, and to be so genuine and honest and open about both, where, toot your own horn where you succeeded, but also be absolutely brutally honest about where you frigged up, and that's great because how else do we learn, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, there's an old saying, and it might be military, it might not. I might be totally just imagining that, but like, the lessons we learn are written in blood, which is a very dark way of saying that. Like, you learn from screwing up, you learn from getting hurt. That's how most of us have to learn lessons. And I would always prefer someone else learn from my mistakes than you have to bleed to learn. I would prefer that for anybody, even like nameless, faceless people I'll never meet. Yep. Because to have to live through a situation like we did was difficult. And I feel like in some ways it affirmed the fact that we had a pretty good handle on this, much better than most of our neighbors did.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm also very quick to point out, like, at the Prepper Super Bowl, I didn't shut the other team out and run 7 touchdowns down their throat. We had problems we had to deal with. And I think that's super important. I think it's the only genuine way for like a podcaster or anybody that creates content is to be honest. I mean, when you screw up, you screw it up. It just means you're human.
You mean life isn't like Instagram?
No,
there was no filter that week.
I love it.
No, there was no filter that week.
So where can people find you, Phil, and Gillian, for that matter? Plug whatever you got coming on or where you're going or how people can find you, because everybody should be listening to Matter of Fact. I love it. So
I agree.
Yeah.
Now, Matter of Fact's podcast is easy to find. We've got our own website, mofpodcast.com, because Matter of Facts was like too many vowels, consonants that was going to all run together. So mofpodcast.com. You can find us on Prepper Broadcasting Network. You can find us on like iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and God only knows how many other podcast directories we're in if you look for Matter of Facts Podcast. And you can find us on Instagram and on Facebook. We've got a closed group. It's a lot of good people that are always trying to share information and mainly talk smack on each other. But, there's a certain amount of fun to be had there. But I wholeheartedly encourage everybody, like, not just for our show, but if you haven't already listened to Prepper Broadcast Network, please give it a listen. There's so many good shows there. There's so many good hosts, and there's so many different points of view there. Like, that's why I try to bring Gillian on the show, and we always go looking for good guests, because it is those different points of view you get from that network where you can find something on that network that appeals to you directly, no matter what your situation is or your life experience. And if not, you're just not looking that hard.
Ain't that the truth? Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Gillian and Phil. This was awesome. I was just, thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us on, Tim.
Definitely.
You guys, if you want to hang for just 1 second, I'll close up and then I can, you guys be all right?
Sounds good.
All right.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Well, guys, I'm blown away every single week, but that was awesome. I said thank you, but thank you, Phil and Gillian. That was if you guys didn't learn something from their story, you weren't listening. I'm telling you, that was incredible. Where do we go from there? Just yeah, if you want to find me, we've got Thursday preparedness. I'm going to be on the after party tomorrow, which will be a fun kind of free for all type thing. You guys will enjoy that. You've seen me there before, but let's just leave it there, guys. That was just an incredible episode. So anyway, thank you guys. I tell you every week, but you come and hang out with me for an hour and a half, and you can spend your time anywhere. So thank you. And as always, guys, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.